Hello, everyone. Oh, can you hear me okay? I'm not muted. I'm not blocked. It is exciting today, Wednesday. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar, Driving Value Across the Entire Senior Living Community. I'm your host today, Josh Stadzinski. I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at CarePredict, and I have Scott A.I. Smith along with me. Scott, why don't you give a little intro on yourself?
Yeah, my name is Scott Smith. I'm now the Chief Customer Officer with CarePredict, coming from the industry. So I've worked with 5-star senior living as well as working with Thrive Senior Living on the corporate side. And then even before that, starting out with the company, It's Never Too Late, or IN2L, which is now Life Loop. So I've been in the industry since 2012 and joined the team here at CarePredict about 2.5 years ago.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So our discussion today is going to bound all things tech, care, staffing across your entire community utilizing CarePredict as well as other technology. Our views from talking to a bunch of operators, Scott's viewpoints from being on boots on the ground, implementing and seeing the pros, cons, all the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we're going to discuss that today for the next 30 minutes. If you do have questions, we have a wonderful chat. Feel free to pop them on in there, Q&A, throw it into the chat. We'll try to answer those as we go along here. And the recording will be sent out at the end of this webinar. Do not worry. We will get that into your inbox as soon as possible so you could share it out with all your friends and colleagues. So let's jump into it, Scott. We looked at our data and we ran some numbers. I was crunching them last night when we started to look at these. And our data shows that caregivers spend only 27% of their shift in a residence room, which I found very interesting because a lot of the technology that we are building is mostly in residence rooms. So what does this tell you about some of the data and how we operationalize it?
Yeah, so we actually really start to look at where care is being provided, where our team members are interacting with our residents. We see that a lot of that is happening outside of the room. So 27% of your shift is inside the room, providing that care with the resident there. That's great. It's great to have that, and so you can capture that with a lot of different systems. But what that means is, if I do my math, 73% of the time your caregivers are not in the room with the resident. They are in the general area of your community. We can actually see from the numbers below there too that a lot of our residents, we do monitor this in suite, not a suite, are not actually in their suite all day long. If you're a senior living operator on this call, that's your goal. Your goal is to, how do I get my residents out of their room, enjoying the community, being around others, and engaging? And so if we really just say we only track and monitor what's happening in the room, we're missing out on about 73% of what our caregivers are doing because they're just not in the rooms as much as we think they are.
Right. And utilizing technology like CarePredict and other systems, looking across as staff are going about their day and interacting with residents, the whole goal is to spend time with them, enjoying the activities that they want to be enjoying, right? That's why you have an activities calendar, engagement. So going and doing those sorts of things and tracking that activity is definitely pinnacle or very critical as you look at, getting residents out and being engaged.
Yeah, if we really want to see like the whole picture of what a resident's life looks like, what their day looks like, we cannot just isolate ourselves to what's happening in their suite. That's just not where a lot of life is happening for a lot of our residents. And for our team members, if we're only focusing on that small window of time they're in there, we're missing what does their day look like? What is my team doing throughout the entire day? So really saying, let's get out of just the suite and let's look at the community as a whole as an essential part of just understanding the day-to-day of your residents and your team members.
Exactly. And here's another stat that I was crunching last night. Almost 20% of caregiver interactions with residents happen outside of the suite. So delivering care. What does this tell you about the state of care delivery in a lot of communities that use CarePredict, Scott?
It's as we talk about, we have to be mobile. The community is a large footprint. It is the home of our residents. And so just to limit ourselves to that room, we're going to miss out on what we're seeing is about 20% of the care. So when I look at all of our data, the two things that most residents are calling for assistance with is for transferring and escorting. And so those are going to happen in any part of the building. And honestly, when we look at escorting is by nature happening outside of the room, right? Like it has to be done Maybe I'm taking him from the room, but where do I go once we step out of that door? I'm bringing him back. I missed all of that time. So most of our customers, most of their time as a caregiver is actually spent escorting residents to and from dining, activities, different parts of the community. If you cannot measure that, you are actually missing the largest chunk of your caregiver time, and you don't have any insights into that and how long it's taking. And that's going to be a per resident thing based on their gait, how quickly they can walk, how big your building is, where their room is located. But for that to be a blind spot because we're only monitoring what's happening in the suite is a huge blind spot, since it's the number one reason people are calling for assistance.
From a time perspective, when you think about those two ADLs, how much of a chunk does that take up in terms of caregivers' time in a normal community?
You're looking at it's by far the most, 65%, 70%, outside of, when you start looking at, assistance with showering is probably the other one that's from a individual, how long it takes per event. But that's only happening once a day or maybe every other day where I'm doing assistance with showering. Escorting is happening over and over and over again. So what we're typically seeing is about 6 minutes per event. And that is kind of happening depending on the acuity of that resident, could be happening 7 or 8 times a day, if not more. You add in transferring, which can happen inside the suite. I can transfer you from your bed to a chair, whatever that may be, but that's also happening a lot outside of the suite. So I might be, needing to get up off the couch and move to somewhere else. And I need some assistance with that. That's, again, we're missing all of that if we're just watching what's happening in the resident suite.
Yeah, that's great. And you see that a lot on the on-demand side. Talk to me a little bit about what you see just in care overall, from like scheduled to unscheduled, how they kind of all work together in terms of kind of care documentation, where you see the best benefits come from that, from kind of the full community.
Yeah, so when we start to look at these things, outside of escorting, outside that, toileting again is a huge one that we need to be able to document. That's going to be happening all over our community. We have public restrooms, leaving the dining room. I'm calling for assistance there. We see a lot of assistance requests coming from the common area. So that call starts in the dining room, that call starts in the activity room, and that care is provided right there. Now, thinking about kind of that old traditional way of doing things, I now have to go find a computer, or I have to go find some, maybe we have some kiosks set up around. Right. I find those to document that. And the reality of it is most of the time that's just lost care, because I don't have the time to go track down a computer or a kiosk. So when you have the ability to monitor care and to kind of document care everywhere in your community, that's going to give you the most accurate insights into what amount of care this resident is taking and how much a team member is actually doing during their 8-hour shift.
That makes complete sense. And Scott, you brought this up yesterday when we were talking about residents and the way they view their home. It's not just their suite is their home. The community is their home, right? The friends, the family, the interactions that they have. Talking about how you're going and monitoring these health and behavioral changes. How would you do that best when you put this into perspective?
So when I look at this, and having worked in the industry for quite some time, this is the number one kind of response as a salesperson that you're kind of trained to give, is like, I don't know if I can go from 2,500 square feet to a 250 square foot room. And kind of our standard answer in the industry has always been, well, no, this whole building is now yours. So you're now going from 2,500 square feet to 50,000 square feet. And, this whole area is your living environment. This is where you're going to rest your head at night. And so if that's the mentality that we are talking about from the sales process, we also then want to make sure that that's how we are operationalizing our community so that I'm able to look at what is happening throughout the entire community. In a building, and I oversaw life enrichment when I was at 5-star senior living. Our entire goal was to get residents out of their room. That's all we wanted to do. And from a life enrichment perspective, I want to see you interacting with other residents. I want to see you interacting with our team. I want you out of your room, not isolating, and we're even monitoring to see who are those self-isolators. Now, if that's the premise that we're building our entire kind of industry on, is that we want you kind of out of your room and kind of engaging with the community, then our technology has to align with that. So I don't, there's a lack of congruency if I'm going to say, well, I'm going to put all my systems in your suite and we're going to monitor what's happening there, but my entire goal is to get you out of your suite as much as possible. And so if we want to align those two missions, we have to be then a little more agile with how we're monitoring, kind of your day-to-day and the care you're getting. So when we look at this, so from a CarePredict perspective, I want to understand your baseline as a resident. How many steps are you taking? How frequently are you using the restroom? Your sleep patterns, all of these things. I cannot get a solid baseline if I'm only looking at somewhere where you're only spending maybe 2/3 of your day. I have to get that full picture to understand what is normal for you so that I can then understand when there's an anomaly in that normalcy. And so that's what we want to say. The whole building is now available for us to monitor and to see what you're doing as a resident.
I think there's that perspective, but also then the staff side of things too, right? Like if we reflect on the numbers that we talked about in terms of interactions and delivering of care, what's your team doing throughout the rest of the day? How are they interacting with residents? Where are they? What are they doing? Like all of those data points feel very important that you might be missing if you don't have a system like CarePredict that you'd be able to leverage and kind of look at that data. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, if we're looking at it, even if I were to, when I started to look through our data, and you and I were talking through that, at the best caregivers working that first shift still are only spending, 42%, 43%. That's the top echelon kind of caregiver. So you're still missing over half of what they're doing in their day. And so as we start to look at efficiency in staffing, we start to look at just being able to understand, what is a successful caregiver, like to know what they're doing and how their day works, and to create those efficiencies, we have to understand the patterns and kind of where they're spending most of their time. A really, really good caregiver, though, should be engaging with our residents all throughout the community. So it's not just walking into the room, providing care, leaving as quickly as possible. It should be, how do I really create relationships with our residents? And that's going to be done all throughout the community. And so when you're monitoring and when you're kind of gathering data throughout the entire community, you have a better idea of which team members are kind of living that out and which ones are kind of almost avoiding residents or finding the area not to be engaged with the residents.
Right. And it brings a more objective eye to everything, right? Yeah. Like having that subjective or that first impression of somebody that might not be doing that great or somebody who's killing it. Now you actually have the data to support how you actually should feel about that person and the job that they're doing.
Yeah, when I work with our communities and we start talking about some of the data that they're getting through CarePredict, one of the things that I think is really essential that we've really leaned into is, how do I take a more quantitative approach to my review process for my caregivers?
Right.
So that is, what is your response time? What percentage of your day are you spending with residents? Where are you throughout your shift from an accountability standpoint? To be able to do that versus just kind of, I think you're doing a really good job. I haven't heard any complaints about you. You're kind of on time most of the time. Here's your kind of annual review. To really look at the data and then to see, I know this person's my best. What does their day look like and how does that compare to my other team members and how they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really impactful to look at in-suite, out-of-suite time, who people are interacting with and actually see that, because that'll tell you the story of their life, right? Like who they're interacting with, their socialization patterns, their behavioral patterns. It just gives you a really good viewpoint to see if there's any changes that you need to make, or is that person kind of living that, we talk about the vibrant lifestyle that the communities are all talking about and promoting. Like, are you actually promoting that based on the data that you have to support it, right? And one of those words that kind of come up when you think about those things is engagement, right? We think of all the engagement tools out there. You have a Life Loop, a Go Icon. You and I used to work at organizations like that, and we're always trying to get residents out of the room to go to those activities and see who actually is attending those, which ones are the best, which ones are the worst, and how we adjust that. So if you're just having all the tech in the rooms, but trying to get residents out of their rooms, it's almost incongruent with each other because you're not supporting kind of the full lifestyle of what a resident would have.
Yeah, and when we start to look at this too, so we even let's take this idea of engagement and saying, well, okay, we have a great engagement platform. We're using a Go Icon, a Life Loop, it's Sagely, whatever you are in that kind of from those different programs. You're still only monitoring the group programming that's happening in a building, and so what we want to be able to do is say that not everybody engaged best in a large group program. So yes, we may be taking attendance, and yes, I can see that Josh went to all these different programs. Scott didn't do as many of those programs. He must not be engaged well, but Scott has one really good friend that he's hanging out with in the activity room, or maybe he's in one of the happy hour area or by the front door out front. If I know that information, I'm not concerned about your engagement because again, not all engagement needs to be large group engagement.
Right.
So this is a blind spot when it comes to kind of the overall kind of picture we want when it comes to life enrichment and engagement is we're so stuck on attendance and group programming when that's not the reality of how most people actually want to engage. And we used to have a saying when I was kind of overseeing this is we want to avoid the alone amongst many. That person who may come in, they may sit in the very back of the room and you can check mark that they were there, but did they really engage? I'd much rather see someone sitting down with a buddy, having a cup of coffee in our bistro. That we can see that because we're monitoring everything that's happening in the entire community versus saying, well, they didn't come to group programming, they must be isolating, they must be an issue. It's like, no, this person's out and vibrant and they are around other people, even though it's not through our life enrichment program.
That makes a lot of sense. So for the CarePredict users that are on this call and listening to this webinar, what would they do or how would our system support that?
Yeah. So a couple different things that we have on there. So if you're one of our customers, again, under every single residence profile, you have the ability to see their in-suite versus out-of-suite time. We actually had a little, on one of the earlier slides, there was a little snippet, a little screenshot of that, where I can actually see exactly what percentage of the time they were in their suite versus out of the suite. And so we also are looking at things like our depression risk flag. So it's going to be we're going to be rebranding that as an isolation risk flag to say, okay, this person is flagging because they're out of their baseline on how often they're around another person. That is such a better way to monitor and to really visualize that isolation or that engagement than just strictly attendance at group events. We also look at things like, a lot of communities right now are trying to say, hey, pop in, take attendance in the dining room. We need to see who didn't come to the dining room, make sure that people are eating. Those are things that we can automate a little bit, or we at least have reporting for you that you can actually look and see, okay, which residents were in the dining room today and at which times. So that instead of having to actually manually do that, you can run a report and see exactly who was there and who wasn't there. These are the kind of things that allow, because we have kind of full picture of the community insights, it's a huge value that I don't know enough of our customers are actually utilizing right now.
That's a great point. And I know going down the line, we're looking to work closer with some of these technologies to provide attendance and socialization aspects. And that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to enhance, as we talked here, not just that in-suite, but as people go throughout their day, throughout the whole community, how do we provide information back to you to provide the best care and best lifestyle possible to those residents? And let's move on to actually care. It's like I knew these slides were coming up. When you think about documenting care, we touched on this a bit. Measuring those in a system and that is confined to just a suite. We hit on this a lot, Scott, in terms of documenting care. From a technology standpoint, you got to have the phones moving around the community. You got to have good Wi-Fi. Got to have good infrastructure. But it's also probably a lot about the change management, right? Like when you're thinking about this, and caregivers might be going back to a nurse's station for documentation and documenting that every bath took 30 minutes. Talk to me about a little bit that change management that might come into play here.
Yeah, I think anytime you're trying to change processes in a community or with anyone, it's really answering the question for that person who's going to have to change their behaviors. What's in it for me? All right. So that's that very kind of our egocentric, like, what's in it for me and how are you going to make my life easier? And so as we start to implement these things that are going to lead to change, we have to answer that question for the caregiver. What's in it for me? And that it comes down to the simplicity of being able to stay engaged with the resident where you are and be able to mark those things completed. But also, when we start to look at the data you're providing us is going to allow us to move some of these unscheduled tasks that you're doing that are a blind spot to our community into a scheduled task, which is a more efficient use of your time. So instead of you may be coming in, and all of a sudden this resident's asking you for help going to the restroom. And you're going to do that as a caregiver because that's just the heart that you have. I'm going to help this resident. It may not be part of their scheduled tasks. And you're just doing this, and this is a blind spot. You're doing this kind of extra work that the community doesn't really realize you're doing. So by documenting this kind of through our app, we then give the insights to the clinical leadership team to say, oh, wow, I didn't realize Diana was asking to go help in the restroom 10 times a day. That needs to be more of a scheduled task so we can perceive those needs. And now as a caregiver, you're not handling those things as they come up all the time. It's kind of more on a schedule, which creates some more efficiencies, a little bit less chaos for you. So when we're rolling these types of things out, we're always trying to answer that question for our caregivers and for anybody from a clinic, what's in it for them? Because in order to make people change behaviors, you have to give them the reason for it. And so all of those things is kind of helping them understand the big picture. And again, as we start to look at our labor models are all based off of our scheduled care. And so if something is not in scheduled care, for the most part, we're not accounting for it in our labor matrix, in our labor model. And that's just additional work that you're doing. So if I'm a caregiver and I am documenting correctly the things that I'm doing that are not scheduled and those move over to scheduled, that's how we get extra help on the first shift or on the second shift. We have a lot of reporting that's going to show you how much care you're providing every hour of the day. And so it's really insightful for people to say, hey, maybe we should move one of these people to more of a swing shift to cover that busy time, because what we see is kind of 11, 12, and 1, very busy. And then like 4, 5, and 6 is busy. But we've kind of let that morning shift leave at 3:30. And now that second shift is really a little bit less, but they have a kind of a 4, 5, 6 o'clock like rush that's coming. And so if we can move somebody and say, hey, let's create an 11 to 7, we've now really created some efficiencies. And that's a benefit to the caregivers who are always saying, hey, we're overworked and understaffed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think a big thing here too is integrations. And we all talk about it a lot. We all talk about interoperability. One of our amazing partners, Alice, we have an integration with them on the EHR side. So not only are they going to see the unscheduled and incidental care, we're able to see all of the scheduled care and kind of marry that up together. So one of our clients is Edgewood Healthcare, and a community out in Wyoming, Meadow Wind, was able to look at all of their on-demand and look at all of their scheduled care and move things around and start to decrease their unscheduled alerts where people are pushing their button by about 10% month over month. They were able to save about 2 hours a day from their care team because now they're meeting the expectations of their residents opposed to being interrupted by calls and alerts for things that might already be happening. So they were able to be more prepared and execute better and provide a great level of care at that building.
Yeah, efficiencies in how you provide care is essential to this. And so disruptive things like a nurse call is much it's much less efficient than something that we have scheduled to happen within an hour or within a window.
Absolutely. I think another aspect of CarePredict is that I didn't necessarily think of. I've only been here a year now, and we were on site at a community out in Ohio, and we started talking about community spaces and utilizing our location-based data to say what spaces are being used, how are they being used, how interaction happens. Scott, could you talk a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so we were together in the great state of Ohio, and Ohio, and so we were able to really look at this and working with a potential customer that's building their own communities, and to be able to say through all the data that we have, because we're really looking at the entire space, we have the reporting ability to say pick a room, and we will show you everybody who's been in that room, how long they spent in that room, from the time that our system was implemented. And so when you really start to look at how do we use some of these spaces, is it better to have a dedicated theater room, or should that be a multi-purpose room? What time of the day does our bistro have more people in it? When does when does any of these rooms have people there? We have the reporting to say, show me the last year, show me everybody and how long they spent in each of these different rooms. And so as I'm starting to look at new construction to say, okay, does it make sense to make more multi-purpose rooms with movable walls, or does it make more sense to have these dedicated spaces? You can look at the history of all of your communities and say, no, this is what we're seeing. That theater room sits empty 95% of the time. It's probably not a good use of a space, or that art studio is not getting used on the weekends, those types of things. And so you may even find there's spaces that you really want people to use that they're not using. And so one of the things that I used to do a lot when I was touring our communities at 5-Star was, I want lights on, I want music playing, or I want TVs in spaces that even though people aren't in there, because it's more inviting. So I can now start to evaluate how I'm using these spaces and say, am I making these spaces comfortable? There's a big term and we've had when we started to look at, third spaces. Your first space is where you live, second space is where you work, and your third space is where you're going to be comfortable hanging out. And this is where Starbucks really and coffee shops really took off, is creating third spaces for people. As we look at our residents, say we want them out of the room, we want them engaging, we have to look and go, have we created comfortable third spaces for them? And let's identify what the most likely one is through some of the data we have, or let's monitor the success. We started turning lights on and started turning music on and TVs on in this room. All of a sudden we see that our residents are coming in here more. Let's replicate that across our portfolio.
Absolutely. I think two things come to mind. First thing is, I just saw, it's funny you bring up Starbucks as kind of the third place. What's actually taken over that is fitness centers. People actually going to the gym and meeting and mingling. I think it's become a new place to go and meet people and hang out and, match make, if you will. So it's been interesting to think about that, and also think about the generation coming into senior living. We're thinking about the boomer generation here and the expectations around what a community should look like. Right? You have all these amenities and expectations that you live in your current home, and now moving into a community that might have been built 40 or 50 years ago. So utilizing that data, even if you're going through not just new construction, but renovations, you might have had every room's kind of siloed off, and now you're looking to make this grand room where people can interact and have a free flowing space. So you could utilize that data from CarePredict as well to help with renovations and making it a space that might meet the generation that's coming in today.
Yeah, it's all about data, right? Like we want to know, instead of just making these assumptions, and this will change regionally. You may have different parts of the country. As I traveled the country, whether it was with CarePredict or with other tech companies I work for, or as on the care side of things, a lot of this stuff was very regional. Like what part, like there's some parts of the country like they love just to sit on the front porch.
Yeah,
right? You have that. You're going to put out comfortable chairs and have them on the front porch. There's other people that they like these different like sunrooms. They want to be some they just want to sit and hang out in the dining room all day. And so really understanding your population in that part of the country, in that building, will allow you to make those spaces more usable, which will attract more people there. And again, as we said at the beginning, if our goal is to get our residents enjoying the entire footprint that we have as a community, using the data that we have to say, here are the places that they would like to go, and then let's make those more comfortable is a great and efficient use of the technology.
Absolutely. And if you're building in the Midwest and you're looking in the south suburb of Chicago, you might put up a garage, because we all hang out in our garages for some reason. I put a TV out there hanging out. It's the social center of countryside Illinois, I'll tell you that.
There you go.
Last part here before we wrap on up and go to questions, Scott, we had, looking at the care team behind the suite, and we touched on this a bit, but would love your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think, again, as we start to look at understanding the day-to-day of our caregivers, we want to know where they're spending their time. Mm-hmm. And you have two ways of looking at this. You have the benefit of the doubt, the positive, and then you have hey, I also need some accountability for my team because we're entrusting them for the care of older adults. So, but to be able to look at a specific individual team member and really understand what did their day look like, for the good or for the bad side, it's essential to have that. And if you're only monitoring what they're doing inside a room, you're missing out on between 60 and 70% of their actual day and time. And so we really want to say, like, looking at that positive approach, I want to understand my team members and where are they spending time? Are they in the common areas with our residents? That's a good use of their time. Or are they kind of up in the corner of a hallway where we don't have a lot of traffic and they're kind of spending a lot of time up there? We want to be able to do that, but we want to give them credit for the care that they're providing. When we really start to look at those escorting, the time for escorting, that adds up very, very quickly. And so for you to be able to look at that and go, wow, this team member spent 3 hours just escorting residents to and from dining or to and from activities. I didn't even think of that as what they were doing in their 8-hour shift. I may need to kind of reevaluate some of my staffing models, or even kind of some of the care points I'm using for escorting. You're missing all of that if you're just watching the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And Scott, one thing we hear when we're implementing CarePredict or talking to prospects is that there might be some pushback at the staff level. So staff will wear it on their lapel so we can monitor location, services being delivered, interaction with residents. So there's a whole bunch of data points that you get. If a community is looking at something like this, what would you tell them, and what are some best practices for kind of dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like that, a lot of our team members are going to look at that negative side, like, oh, now you're just trying to big brother and watch me. But really, what we're trying to do, and it's all about people here are probably sick of hearing me say, words create worlds. So the words I use when I talk to my team about this really do matter. And so you've heard Josh and I say the word monitoring a lot. Like, that's a very different word than tracking. And so nobody wants to be tracked. Our residents don't want to be tracked. Our team members don't want to be tracked. But monitoring where you're providing care is a much different, and giving you credit for the care that you're providing outside of the resident suite to understand what your workday actually looks like. By wearing this, we're able to monitor that, and we're able to then hopefully create some efficiencies to make your job easier, or see that all these things that we didn't realize this resident was requiring, you've been telling us you're overworked, you don't have enough time. I can now you can show them, say, look, this is what it took me this amount of time to escort her back and forth. That's if you multiply that by the number of residents we have, this is why we're struggling to maybe get our care tasks done, or this is maybe why we need an additional, person in this on this shift. So I always approach it as, we want you to get credit for the care you're providing, no matter where in the building you're providing that care. And that really is how we try to create the world where the caregiver says, okay, there's something in it for me. Again, at the same time, you may need to take a little more firmer approach and say, this is now part of the uniform too. So there's an accountability with that. And so it's also like, this is why, here's the benefits to you, here's the benefits to our residents. And now, just as a name tag is part of your uniform, so is the tempo on your lapel. So there's accountability that we have to have with that if you're going to work for our community, because the value of the data that we're getting is essential to providing the best care for our residents.
Makes a lot of sense. And Scott, that brings us to the end of our conversation here. I'm going to go over to the questions and chat if we have any. Do you have any communities that use CarePredict in California?
We do. So we have quite a few communities that use that. WellQuest Senior Living is one of our customers that are out there. We also have a couple communities up in the San Francisco area. I would say probably right now 10 to 12 different communities in the state of California.
Okay, awesome. Hold on here. Let me make this open. I had the chat blocked, so now it is open. I just had the question and answer open. Okay. It looks like that's it for us, Scott. If anybody does have any questions that they have, feel free to send us an email, reach out through the website, however you want to reach us. We're happy to talk more about CarePredict and what we're seeing in industry. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.